If you do enough and you watch enough, you say, what went wrong there? Or what was right there? You can kind of learn. So I'm just sort of going to dump a little bit of what I've learned, and this is probably the key thing. And there's some elements that project teams need to have, and you as a participant on a project team need to have to be successful in doing this. That was the gentleman who wrote The Art of War. Not that construction is like war, but sometimes it is a mechanical assault on the environment. And preparation is the key. If you're not prepared, something may happen. Some of the projects I'm going to talk to you about is the consequences of things going wrong are really big. A lot of projects, you're going to extend a sidewalk or, improve a garage. If it's small, maybe some of those things you may not have to think about, but some of them you may. When you think about green building, all the way down to materials, paint, etc., it really encompasses every thought on all projects. The luxury I've had on a couple occasions, and I'll get to Water Treatment Plant 4, it's a $500 million project, which I've been working on for 6 years now. We have 6 years of lessons learned on a $500 million project that gives us lots of time to say what's working here and what's not. Okay, so that was a little cooler in my version of PowerPoint, but that's okay. Imagine now, since you're all involved in design and construction, what typically happens when you're just getting started, you go to school and you learn design and construction principles, and maybe someone gives you a project and you get started on it. You don't really fully understand client and regulatory requirements, and your ability to really look beyond that project is very limited. But this is the way, it's amazing how many times I see projects that people, they do the green level of, yeah, okay, here's the design principles, here's the construction stuff, you know that, and then they start to incorporate regulatory stuff, but do they have the ability to look beyond the project to even think anything differently? No. Do they take the time to do that? No. And it's just amazing how many times I see stuff like, did you even think about what was going on? And sometimes I have to check myself. I'm a Midwesterner. I sort of have, it's almost, I feel like Rich Daley is part of my genetic heritage, because I just sometimes speak the way I really feel. And I was in a meeting recently, just to give you a perspective, where someone presented some information on their strategy on how to get something done. It was 6 people had worked for a couple of months. And I said, you got to be kidding me. You've presumed a solution before you did the analysis. Your assumptions are all wrong. How can 6 people, bright people, get this wrong? But it happens all the time. So the preferred way, so that's, as we know, that's what happens. Oftentimes, even if someone reaches that pinnacle, they've already assumed the design approach, they've already assumed how they're going to do the regulatory principles, and then they say, oh shoot, there's this other stuff going on. I got to try to do something to mitigate that. Well, that's what it looks like when you do that. And you end up causing more problems because you really, you're out of budget perhaps, and you really don't have time to think about, what's the consequences of this new thing I'm going to do to mitigate the poor decisions I've already made. So this is my preferred approach. I think this is what a holistic view is. You ask, what's going on here before you make any decisions about design and construction. Sometimes regulations require that. Okay, you got to get a topo. Okay, that gives me some background. I'm amazed how much oftentimes I see designers get topos. They go to work and they think the project ends at the project boundary, at the property line. Did you think to look what's going on next door or in the neighborhood? So, but awareness beyond minimums, I'll explore that a little bit further about what I mean. But sometimes it's not always apparent what those minimums are, and that's where the difficulty is, because if you're a designer, or even if you're in charge of getting a project done from A to Z, public or private, you got schedules, you got budgets. You can't spend all day dreaming, golly, I wonder what if. So there has to be some discipline incorporated into that line of thinking. But this is where you can, I can't tell you, and I won't tell you all the projects that have this completely wrong, because I've seen hundreds of millions of dollars spent on projects that don't do this, and you end up trying to patch this thing together in the end, and it doesn't work. So here's another way of thinking about it. How can this project minimize effects or improve the environment as a whole? There's that whole design concept of restorative design, if you guys are familiar with that. You're going into a place, you're going to, using the analogy that it's a battle or surgery or something like that, you're going to cut open this site, this project. It's a vulnerable time. Well, maybe while you're in there, reconstruct the knee, to use that analogy. Is there something could be accomplished with the financial investment of doing that work that might be better than just doing the project alone? If you've come saying, what's the minimum I have to do? Tom, do you have a checklist from the city of Austin to make sure I meet the minimums? I think you're going to be disappointed today, because I'm not going to give you that. If you want a minimum, that's our code. And you can read our code and go through the check boxes. But that's, like I say, you will be disappointed if that's what you're after. Here's a project I worked on in early 2000s. This Great Ape Trust, believe it or not, moving bonobo chimps, depending on how well-read you are or how much you follow these sort of things. That's Kanzi, the rock star bonobo chimp. Anybody seen that in the news? Okay, all right. Well, a company I was working for, they said, hey, we got this cool project, let's work on this. Our job was to design a habitat for bonobo chimps in the middle of Des Moines, Iowa. Well, that's kind of cool, and it was one of those pinnacle type projects where, we met for a week with the ape and chimp researchers, knowing their habits and what they liked to do, what they didn't like to do. Didn't know chimps use the bathroom. They're toilet trained. These chimps are toilet trained, so how do you manage that? They're clever. Actually, I've actually done work in a prison, and they're like guys put in prison, because they got all day to outwit the security or whatever systems you put up there. So they're going to spend all day thinking. Like a prison I was working in, they had, somebody thought they got tired of landscaping an area, so they put down gravel. Well, the prisoners were picking up the gravel, putting it in their pocket, going back to their cells, and those of them have windows. They had rigged up big slingshots out their window, and they were shooting them at whoever and whatever. Well, just to wreak havoc, I guess. Well, the chimps are the same way. They're strong. They're 3 times stronger than a human being. They'll rip a tree right out of its roots. They'll use it to climb over a fence or do all kinds of things. So at this project, learned all about the bonobos, all this sort of thing. And what we ended up on the design was what this design ended up, we're going to have bonobo chimps, orangutans, and some other great apes. So to keep them separated, they don't like fences, so we put up moats. And because we learned that, chimps and apes, their body fat is not high enough, they just sink. They can't swim. So that's a natural barrier. Some of them fish, and anyway, but Kanzi and his family, he's learned language, and there's a whole board, I don't believe it or not, But there's a whole symbology language that he's learned, and he can press commands and make sentences and do all kinds of stuff. So he's 29 years old or 30 years old now. He's a rock star. He's played music with Paul McCartney. He has been on CNN with Anderson Cooper. If you're interested, watch it online. What's this got to do with elements of sustainable design and thinking right about the project? This project, we learned early on, was in a 100-year floodplain. And the moats are all kind of cool, but there was this, like a dike along the Des Moines River. And when we started looking at it, this dike was this old agricultural thing. It was a piece of crap kind of dike. Client didn't want to rebuild it, but we knew that the water got higher than the facilities. And so we told the client, you really want to put a lifetime of investment in a floodplain in the middle of Iowa where land is cheap? They said, no, this is a great site, we love it. Well, last year there was 3 to 4 feet of water in the chimp habitat. And that's kind of one of those lessons is, as a designer, you can recommend all day to clients. Sometimes they listen to you, sometimes they don't. And okay, they decide not to listen to us. But 3 to 4 feet of water, Mr. Orangutan's kind of hanging on so he doesn't have to get wet because they're terrified of water. And Kanzi actually came up with a new word, scary water. That's what he referred to this environment. So I don't know how many times I've had projects where I asked the client, did you win this property in a poker game or something? Because it's really not well suited for what we're trying to do here. But anyway, you can just suggest, as you know, and you can't demand. So here's some disciplines. I would say, ask questions. For crying out loud, ask a lot of questions. One of the biggest compliments someone ever offered me was, Tom, until you got here, nobody ever asked any questions. Nobody asked, why are you doing it that way? Collaboration is the other element that I would want to focus on. There's so much to know in doing sustainable design. You can't know it all. You cannot, please. So for, how many of you are architects here? Okay, probably the majority of folks are architects. You can't, if you could dispel one notion in architects, please don't emulate Frank Lloyd Wright. Everybody wants to be the rock star architect or the rock star engineer or the rock star something. I'm sorry, you can't be the rock star that knows everything, that has a huge head. You may be a savant in a lot of aspects of architecture, but you are not the person that knows everything about every site and what's appropriate. And if you're not willing to learn and ask questions, then you are, handcuffing your ability to do a successful project. Being an attitude of learning goes along with that. Hey, I've been doing, my resume is gracious. It'll be, next year it'll be 30 years I've been practicing engineering. And I'm still learning a lot. And I love learning. When I moved to Austin 6 years ago, I loved moving here for a lot of reasons, but one of them is I get to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. I kind of knew the whole Chicago Midwestern thing. I knew the plants, the soil, the history, I know all that stuff. Well, here, it's a whole new palette of stuff to learn. And I would suggest, especially in sustainability, I would say one of the most dynamic professions out there. If you stopped learning, you're going to get left behind because things are changing pretty quickly. Ask yourself, what are the issues here? What could be going on? But you give yourself a little bit of time to ask yourself those questions. Don't say, well, we got a week or a month or a year to think about this. No, you don't. Ask yourself, how much time do you have? I read a great story about a company. If anybody's here from there, I'll give you my resume. IDEO is a company, think tank out of San Jose. Do this great stuff. They do product development and design. and you know, a lot of name brand products you're familiar with, but they design stuff for other people. One of the things they do to sort of capture bright ideas, they get the whole company together in a big room when they start a new project, a couple hundred people, and say, hey, this is the new project we're working on. Come to the conference room and we're going to meet at 9 o'clock or whatever. Well, what they do is you got 10 seconds to say what your bright ideas about this project is. Stand up and say it, and they capture all those bright ideas for the couple hundred people. They spend an hour, 1 hour with a whole staff throwing bright ideas out there. And then everybody's excused, then you go back to a small team and you start culling through these bright ideas. But you never underestimate the insights that other people might have. They were featured a couple years ago on Nightline, where they redesigned a shopping cart. It was kind of fun to see what they were thinking about. Adaptive management is a strategy we're using at Water Treatment Plant 4, basically saying, if something goes wrong, what are you going to do? How are you going to know if something didn't happen the way you expected during design? All right, here's the 4 H's of things to consider. History. I'll show some examples of this. History, habitats, hydrologic regimes. Since I work for Watershed, have to put that in there. Hazards. I have listed a few things there, CO2 being one of them. I think what's interesting is I'm not sure how many people right now, when they do a project, are calculating their carbon footprint of their project and making design level decisions based upon CO2 outputs. I mean, we may do it, again, we might do it after we've figured out our design, after we figured out our client and regulatory requirements, we might, well, this is the output. Other places are starting to make decisions based upon your CO2 for projects. Project A versus Project B, or different alternatives within the project. You're saying, which one's going to have the greatest negative impact on carbon emissions? I like to there's some interesting things. We'll talk about some of those other things: water, light, soil, chemicals, magnetism. I had an old boss who said, pollutants are resources out of place. I think that's, and sometimes those resources are so dispersed that it's not worth picking them up. Whether it's, let's say you spilled a drop of gasoline when you're gassing up your car, well, yeah, it's there. It's either volatilizing or running down the curb. But okay, if you had a sponge and you got it and picked it up and tried to squeeze it out back into your tank, it's probably not worth it to go to all that trouble. And the impact for your one action may not be that great. And I guess the question we always ask, well, what's the sum total of everybody gassing up their cars? But that's why we have water quality. If you didn't know, we have water quality treatment at all gas stations in Austin. Obstructions is another hazard. We'll talk about some, and maybe we haven't really thought about that as well. So 4 H's of things to consider. We'll go through, in our time together, Barton Springs Pool. I mean, I'm hitting all the emotional buttons here, right? 6th Street. I know no one's really not that emotional about oil spills, but 6th Street does evoke certain emotions. Water Treatment Plant 4, certainly love it or hate it. People have an opinion oftentimes, especially folks in the green community have formulated an opinion, I would guess. We won't take a vote, okay? Okay, so here's Barton Springs Pool. Lovely place. Feels like it's going to be a good place to be today. Maybe you're going to be there later. That's what amazed me when I came to Austin is Barton Springs Pool. Holy cow, you got to be kidding me. People swim in there and it's that clean and you can see that far down. From Chicago, you'd have to drive about 600 miles before you saw anything that looked that clean. Maybe an old strip mine lake that doesn't have any life on it might be that clear. So if you didn't know, Barton Springs Pool has a bypass. On the right-hand side, which is the north side of the pool where the bathhouse is, underneath that sidewalk is a big box culvert. That was built in 1975, and the purpose of it is to route sort of nuisance pollutant flows around the pool. And so in the process, so we found out a couple years ago it cracked. I mean, like cracked like a big bone cracking that people could hear it throughout the whole pool. And then the pool level dropped 3 feet right after this big crack. You know, so then a lot of investigation. Believe it or not, we're still kicking the tires and trying to come up with a design that's going to satisfy all our regulatory requirements. But let me, there's a cutaway view, thank you SketchUp, of that. So it's a 6x10 box culvert. What I'd like you to do is, you got to fix this thing. The fix, one of the proposed fix, because this thing, we did the calculations and there's not enough mass on this thing to keep it in place. It has its safety factors to keep it from sliding away and slipping into the pool aren't up to standard. So we got to add more mass to this thing. And so the other thing we have here that was creating a problem, if you look right here, we got a water surface elevation in the pool, and most of the time there's not much water in the bypass. So what you have is you have an uplift force, buoyancy force on that, plus we have weep holes over here, and what that sets up is this motion of water doing this and going into the bypass and has eroded out underneath the bypass. So we have a problem with this instability both in the mass and with the water. We also, salamanders live underneath the bypass too. So in my experience, this is one of the most complex, to be honest with you. It's a box culvert, for crying out loud. You know, you think, well, when we first started investigating, yeah, we'll just get a contractor, have them spray some stuff in it, and we'll add some mass and we'll be done. But once we started getting into it, we're like, oh man, if we do this, that messes up that. And so it's this complex thing. So one of the suggestions, a bright idea right out of a Titan missile silo, in nuclear facilities you use this stuff, magnetite, in the concrete there because it makes it heavier and more dense, and you have less radioactivity frying your crew that has to be there. This is the Titan missile silo that's outside of Tucson in Green Valley. Fascinating tour if you want to know what one old school bomb can do to Los Angeles. Amazing. But anyway, they use that there. So the proposal was, hey, let's use magnetite in the concrete, add the mass, and then it'll be more stable. So what I'd like you to do is just amongst yourselves for a few moments, few minutes, I'd like you to talk about, well, what would you do? How would you consider the 4 H's here? And if I could figure out what are those habitats, hydrology, history, and hazards. Okay, how would you think about those 4 things with respect to whether this is a good idea or not? And then what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to talk to somebody who doesn't do what you do. I don't want 2 architects, I know that may not be possible since half of you are architects, but it would be interesting if you talk to your neighbor, and if you're, I guess since you're a majority of it, I'll let you stay seated and talk to your neighbor. But what I'd like you to do is, I want you to extract good ideas from your neighbor. I don't want to hear, and at the end I want you to share some of those ideas, but I don't want to have you hey, here's my good idea. I want you to convince your neighbor that this is a reasonable thing to consider. What are some reasonable things to consider about, yes sir?
So what form does this material come in and how is it applied? I mean, that's pretty critical,
It's a good question. It is used as a substitute to the aggregate. So it's like a high-density aggregate. I should have clarified that. That's what makes it all work. So
The idea is not to remove the box, but
that's correct. So I give you 3 minutes to have a conversation with your neighbor and try to find out some bright ideas, what you would consider in use this or not use this. And you don't have to have the ideas, maybe just further questions. What questions would you ask to get at this? Okay? What kind of great ideas and thoughts and questions did your neighbors come up with? Yes?
She came up with a good idea.
Oh, okay.
She convinced me.
All right. So what is that?
It depending, not knowing the volumes that you have to have, if you could line that rectangular section with a more stable shape that's round and slip it in and make it with maybe some of that, slip it in sections at one end and keep slipping in.
Okay. Great, good. That is one of the alternatives we kicked around. So yes, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm assuming this is a natural mineral here. It's just a stone that occurs naturally.
It's strangely enough, it's organic in nature.
Okay. So what, is there some sort of a leachate issue from?
There is no leachate. No. Yes, sir.
One of the questions we had and why you would use this product is where you're trying to make it heavy, or make it heavier so that you don't have that uphill issue. By sliding another tube in there and filling it in, is that heavy enough? Is that one of the issues you have? And is that why you're using this material?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is balance a capacity, because if we neck it down too much, then we lose capacity, so the pool floods more often. And if you know, when the pool floods, then it's closed for 4 or 5 days to clean it. So what we're trying to do is minimize the loss of space inside of it. But great points. Yes?
Well, our question was, how do you know whether this, how do you know whether this element, whatever it is, going to affect the salamander?
That's you win the prize. That's certainly, that's what we found out just through asking the question. So what would happen to the salamander? We didn't know this, but Lori Dries, if you guys know Lori, again, hey, don't ask an engineer to do this research on what affects salamanders. But Lori Dries, our salamander biologist, did the research and said, well, you know what? Inside a salamander, there's a grain of magnetic material in their head. True. That helps them figure out where to go. Well, if we're underneath a bypass and we put this magnetic stuff in there, what's going to be the effect? Well, we didn't know. We weren't going to, hey, let's just put it in and see what happens. So that was the answer to the question was, no, we don't want to do that because, it could negatively affect the salamanders. And we didn't, when we started, we didn't know that was even a possibility. But now we know magnetic fields. Will magnetite, would it be enough through substrates? What would affect? We don't know, but we're not going to try it. But it was asking questions. Hey, they use it, appropriate solution for Titan II missile silos. It's not appropriate for Barton Springs Pool. I mean, that's obviously makes sense. But anyway, Tina also came up with that answer over there, so yay. So anyway, that's the kind of questions you have to ask is, wow, and did I ever know that there was magnetic debris or whatever wayfinding stuff inside of a salamander's head? No. But now we know, and it helps us in future projects at the pool to know, hey, could cause a problem. I didn't ask this question, but did any of you see any opportunities at the pool. Because that's kind of what I was, yes?
I mean, couldn't you do a filtration system out of backwater and filter the water as it comes? Would that just be, I'm just wondering what the cost difference would be between the two of them.
You mean filter before it enters the pool?
Right, you just let it naturally enter the pool.
We had talked about that. In fact, in order to do that well, you'd have to have a facility that sort of shunts the water off to a pond or something like that, and that pond with treatment facilities would have to be about 75 acres to handle the flow coming into Barton Springs pool. So, you know, if we had a mechanical system there, perhaps, but mechanical system, chemical flocculation right before you get to an endangered species habitat, we thought, nah, we don't want to do that. So,
I saw those big filters when they were filtering out Hamilton Pool. That's what I was thinking of.
right, but the problem is when Hamilton Pool is just that, a pool. When we have a storm event at a Barton Springs pool, it's 100,000 CFS or something crazy like that. If you've ever been there, you can hear it several blocks away. It's roaring, the flood flow. So, but that's you know, there's no bad answers when you're brainstorming and things, and that's why we said, hey, could we do this? And we actually followed that to say, no, that really wouldn't work. Well, here's interestingly the opportunity, and this is kind of a principle. Sometimes the problem is an opportunity in disguise. Remember I mentioned this hydraulic discontinuity here? Well, we're always, when we have storm events, and actually even through the main spring, we get sediment coming in through the main spring. So just understand that it doesn't have to rain a lot or overtop the dam to have a water quality issue at the pool. So we had this discontinuity happening, and when we have those events, we have to clean these this is the beach, which is known as the beach, which is it's not really a beach, it's 6 feet down, and it's a gravel area, but it's called a beach, and it's where salamanders, the ones that do live in the pool, they live here, and they live in the main spring. Well, and when it gets debris on it, you have to clean off that sediment. Well, what we're going to do is put holes in the bypass and a valve, so when they want to do cleaning, all they have to do is connect the hose onto it, and we harness the differential between these two water surface elevations and clean the pool. No moving parts. We just take advantage of that. So that's the kind of thing. The problem of differential water levels is actually creates an opportunity if you can figure out how to do it. So that's the plan. Had a meeting with the consultant yesterday, and they've got a whole valving system that will be flush with this wall, and there will just be little holes in the deck where someone can drop a key and open up a hole into the bypass, and we can clean the pool using the bypass. So that's kind of fun. So recapping, those are the 4 H's we talked about. All right. And going through these individually, history, the 6th Street oil spill. Anybody remember that? This is an interesting thing regarding history. When that oil spill happened, if you know, it was a 25,000 gallon tank that was half full of diesel fuel. We didn't know why. Why was it there? Who owned it? Because Littlefield building is here and the Driscoll is here. Who's responsible? Well, our guys started doing their homework and asking questions and looking and looking. You're like, this thing is so old it's rotting. How's anybody going to figure it out? Well, good news, Colonel Littlefield never threw anything away. So we found all his receipts for buying everything he ever bought at his hotel, or his hotel and office building here. So we went through all these receipts, and we found out he's buying a bunch of diesel. Then the other thing we found out through one of our spill investigators there's this great resource that if you don't learn anything else from this, if you're working in Austin, if you're working in San Antonio, I don't know if it works or not, historical council minutes. The clerk's office, city clerk's office, has 100 years of records that are digitized of council minutes. And if someone ever had anything to say about your site or your project, it may be in those. You can text in advanced search, you can put it in, so from 1900 to today, it's all in there. The robust minutes are 1909 from to today. The history here that we learn, and this is one of those things, if you're going to work here, the Native Americans, and I've worked a lot with Native Americans, Joe and I were talking earlier, they have what's Navajo mean? Navajo means in their language, it means the people. If you go somewhere else and ask them what's Potawatomi mean, the people. Everywhere, all the Native Americans are all the people. And it's like, what's that about? Well, what they defined themselves was they knew so much about where they lived. We are the people of the place. And I would encourage us as professionals to know the place where we're practicing, know the history, know why we did stuff. Well, history here is Red Bud Isle. We had a flood, right? For years in the 19th century, early 20th century, City of Austin could not maintain dams on the Colorado River. Every time it rained or every couple of years, it would wash them out. Red Bud Isle is the remnant of one of those. Well, that was the hydroelectric dam that powered the whole city of Austin. 1900, there was a flood, broke the dam, and guess what? Everybody that's all excited about electricity and this whole new cool thing, you got nothing. You got no electricity, and you lost a dam. So it's not like you can, it's just down power lines and let's go. You lost the whole generating facility. So guys like Littlefield and the Driscoll and several of the old buildings downtown, they said, we're never going to be put in that position again. So they put their own generators in their basements, and hence the reason for the big honking tank there. And that tank, if you took a tank off of a railroad car and squeezed it into an alley, that's how big that tank was. It's not a little, playground tank or something like that. It's a massive thing. So understanding the history, hey, somebody asked the question, well, what about all the rest of them? And what we found out too, knowing some history, is the city of Austin in 1909 had a fire at Tips Steel. Yeah. Well, there was something happened. It's a little fuzzy yet, but something happened with a fuel tank inside the building when somebody went in to fight the fire, and boom, there's a problem. So city council in their wisdom said, hey, we don't trust you staff level. No offense to us City of Austin staff. We don't trust you staff level to make decisions anymore. Anybody wants a tank in the City of Austin, they got to come to us. Well, fortuitous as that is, what that created was a record of 70 years of buried tanks throughout Austin. Every time somebody wanted one, they have to say, I'm at 235 this street, and I want to put this kind of tank in for this kind of purpose. So to facilitate redevelopment and understanding history, we went through, mapped all those out. Believe that's still available on the GIS as a layer on our GIS development website. And we also went to TCQ and said, well, where are there problems throughout the city? So we've mapped, we're trying to facilitate those kind of decisions for designers. Is there a historical issue with my site? Well, these are two sources for you. Council minutes are one of them. The mapping that we've done is another. Consequences of that was we had all this oil go into Waller Creek. Certainly none of it made Lady Bird Lake, but it was very expensive, lawyers, all that kind of stuff. The other thing about history, everybody says about Homeland Security, see something, say something. What was interesting about this, we had multiple construction projects that had happened right over the top of that tank, and nobody said anything. We had utilities, new pavement, all this public and private, and nobody said, hey, I wonder what that big thing is there. Well, it wasn't in their scope of work. I'm just putting a utility in. And that's, you know, it could have solved or saved us, city and taxpayers, a lot of money if someone would have said, hey, I think there's something here that could be a problem. And knowing history is another thing. It comes up to current events. Block 21, right across from City Hall. There's perk in the ground there. Well, they tested as part of their initial phase 1, phase 2 on the property and found they were just over the limit for perk, that dry cleaning fluid. And now they've got to put in a filtration system. A little unsure, you know, we've got issues, you know, it sounds like, you know, like a sustainable thing. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, but anyway, that's another aspect, brand new. If you don't know history, you may have a problem. This is regarding habitat, mussels. I mean, I think someone on your design team needs to know something about the habitats of Austin. Mussels is something we're just learning more about. There's no regulations on mussels in Austin, so don't worry yet. However, fascinating thing as you begin. Okay, sometimes people say, well, you can't hug a mussel, right? It's, you know, they're really not attractive. You don't make stuffed animals out of them or anything like that. So that's a problem, but we have threatened and endangered species of mussels throughout the United States. Well, what are you going to do to preserve those? Well, you have to understand how they work. What's fascinating about these, and just gives you an idea why we need to pay attention to these kind of species, it requires, in order for them to reproduce, they need a healthy fish population, because they kind of belch up their fertilized eggs to get in the gills of fish, and the fish, they sort of stay there for a while till they're mature, and then they drop out somewhere else in the stream. Well, you don't have fish, the right kind, it has to be the right kind of fish that's going to be near these things at the right time. You don't have fish, you don't have mussels, you don't have a vibrant ecosystem. Well, what can we do to minimize damage to those habitats? That's a question we continue to ask, but we're asking. These are classic stormwater runoff. So there's the hydrology thing. If you're not understanding how much, if you live in Austin and you don't understand how much it rains here, I guess, I'm sorry. You need to turn around, don't drown. You need to, you know, it's very destructive when you have a rain event. And contractors love droughts. And there's a reason why, because these kind of things won't happen. Silt fences don't get blown out. You don't lose topsoil. All the vegetation you've worked hard to establish, you don't lose it all. However, you know, I would suggest that on your team, we've tried to encourage people to be CPESC, is a acronym for Certified Soil Erosion Professionals. We've encouraged people, more of the civil engineers and landscape architects in the community, to learn what CPESC rules are and get up to speed on that, because gone are the days when a silt fence, you know, it's not enough. Because as you see here, you can't even tell where's the construction runoff. It's breached this silt fence, so probably it's coming from the far end up here, but you know, there's no difference in water quality on either side of the silt fence. It's useless. Hazards. This is something we considered at Water Treatment Plant 4. I don't know who that guy is. That's what the winning architect, that's him, right? But one of those things that we don't normally think about, and it'll be interesting for us as a design community to become more aware of, is that 1 billion birds in the United States die every year when they run into buildings. There's a whole movement of bird-friendly building design. I haven't heard anybody really talking about it here in Austin. Maybe you architects are? Okay, great. And there's some, you know, we always, you know, like when a cardinal runs into my window, you always say, stupid bird, doesn't it realize, you know, whatever. No, they don't have the the physical capacity to, with the depth perception and reflection and everything else, they can't see. They don't have the biology, physiology to actually see. So there's a whole school of design on how to have the windows that we love and make attractive spaces without being hazards, obstructions for birds running into them. The only thing that's worse than birds, cats. True. All right. I want to get in your groups or not move or just talk to your neighbor again. What would happen, and what this will sort of get a little closer to home here, because you're usually designing at Barton Springs Pool and you're not doing tanks and alleys. When you're doing a green roof, this is Kathy Zarsky's green roof, if you know Kathy, beautiful green roof. It's a native, sort of a xeriscape green roof in the hill country. What considerations for those 4-H things we talked about, what would you consider before you put in a green roof? Or are we at the point where we are and it's sad, but even in the design profession we have greenwashing takes place. Hey, it's got a green roof, it must be a sustainable building. Really? What kind of things would you ask yourself or of the design team before you put in a green roof? And so if you take a few minutes to do that, I would appreciate it.
My fear is our drought incidents are so few and far between. We have drought with a few incidents of rain.
Yeah, from a water conservation, it's the one thing, ironically, if you do a green roof, no one's checking the water bill, no one's checking how much fertilizer you put on it, and so the only criticism you'll probably get as a designer is when it's brown. Like, what? I thought I ordered a green roof, not some dormant brown thing. So that's a big issue, for sure. What else?
I've done a couple of green roofs in Houston, and we went to the big Purdue's that cultivated sedums and all this specialties and all. And it didn't work out. It either went from the periods of Houston where it was saturated with moisture to the periods where it's like now it's just totally desiccated. Whereas just a few blocks away was an old decrepit carport that had gathered dust and sediment and all, and it was just flooded. Yes. And in retrospect, I really should have gone up there and determined what is working.
That's a great point. And yeah, learning from what nature's already teaching you. I mean, if you look around, that's one of the, as a Midwestern boy, when you come here and you say, dang, look at that plant growing right out of that rock. How many times do you see that and is that not the usually environment that a green roof would be in? The plants on a green roof? So, what else?
What was the goal of the green roof to begin with?
Yeah.
I mean, were you just wanting to have this garden spot on the roof, or were you wanting to you had this flat roof, so you wanted to do something with it? Could have done water collection or solar or something
Right.
else.
Good point. A lot of time, from a greenwashing perspective, clients will say, well, I would just want a green roof because I heard that's good and I want to be able to tell my buddies my project has a green roof on it. Well, at some point, okay, if you explain to them, well, you could do this or that or something else and achieve the same results.
Well, first of all, you got to back up and say, what kind of impact is it going to have on the budget? I mean, you've got weight up there, you've got to contend with, rain you've got to contend with after the water percolates through. What does it do to the budget? I mean, would it be better to have a well-insulated roof that catches the water and put into a cistern and reutilized properly? Or, we were just talking about, you've got a tremendous amount of weight there. It's got to be transformed into the budget increase, no matter what you do.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. And that's what building commissioning is. At least I've heard people talk about the origins of building commissioning is when designers give clients stuff they don't want. And the whole idea is of building commissioning is, the commissioner is supposed to say, I know these are the top 10 priorities of this client, and that's not on it, and it's going to be a budget impact. So I know we all have, here's an opportunity to use that thing I always wanted to use. Well, unless it's in the client's wish list or they agree to it, you know, sometimes it's a real hard sell.
Can I add two comments? Obviously, this client wanted it and has maintained it. One of her, I know Kathy and many people here do, she wanted the green roof, she loves green roofs, and she's studying this green roof, and she understands the maintenance, and she's a big advocate for the maintenance of it. So, as your client asked for this green roof, you certainly have to introduce the requirement of maintaining green roofs. And as green roofs make their way into Austin, with some of the ordinances in place, et cetera, one of the recommendations is that you do have a maintenance contract or some definition of how you're going to maintain it. And then with regard to water quality, Tom mentioned that the soils associated with many of these green roof systems, they have it's like a secret recipe, and no one gets to know what the special ingredients are. And that's one thing that concerns water quality. One design solution that's been suggested, if you do have concern with how the green roof runoff is going to affect the water quality of the streams, is to actually have a rainwater catchment system associated with your green roof, so that when the big rain events happen, you fill your water tank, and then that water tank is used to irrigate that green roof and try to close that loop with the nutrients associated with that roof.
Yeah, great. Yes. Yes, I would. Yeah. Go ahead.
My question would be related to maintenance, as Maureen discussed, and more in terms of when the roof develops a leak, what are you going to have to do to find that leak, replace and repair it? And that becomes a real issue with the roof and having to take that green roof off now versus to locate and then repair the leak and then reinstall the roof. So from a budget perspective, that just doesn't seem like a very smart approach to maintenance.
Right. Yeah, I think there's some, I'm aware of some people in landfill liners, when it's the same kind of membrane, same family of membrane, there's a way to put up a probe that measures the differential, and you can find those leaks that way. How well that works on green roofs, I'm not sure.
And would you be able to get typical homeowners insurance to cover something like this?
That's a great question. Yeah, because, you know, if Kathy didn't maintain, she's in the hill country, not too far from the Oak Hill fire area, so an ember falls on that when that's all dormant. Now, she's gone to great lengths because I believe her husband's a concrete contractor, so I mean, I don't think that whole thing could burn and it probably won't affect the contents of the house. But other places where you burn through the membrane, you get a fire, you burn through the membrane, you might be dropping embers into the building. It's a real question.
I think this comes down to, if it is a desire of the client, and you're going to meet your client's requirements, just addressing all these questions with reasonable design strategies and maintenance strategies, et cetera. And you can still obtain a beautiful green roof, as this one is, and as the green roofs that are on City Hall as well. So we didn't mean to slam green roofs here. Just as an example of all the questions that need to be asked. Again, if you're going to put something up, it's not going to be banana plants. This is more likely to thrive.
One last question on the green roofs. Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the other considerations is whether the client wants it to be a usable space or whether it is simply a green roof. This one looks like it's a patio too, so people go up there and it's more of a garden.
Right.
I saw another LEED presentation, and I think some of you might have been there for that. I think it was an apartment complex somewhere up in the northwest, and they used it for the water quantity issue.
If somebody wanted to put a green roof, well, they didn't even understand the hydrology in the Seattle environment. 70% to 80% of the rainfall on that green roof is never leaving it. Well, the hydrology in the stream, whether these are salmon streams, are starved for base flow. You just stole it. This project's going to steal base flow against salmon, or so the salmon wouldn't survive. So ask yourself a question: is it appropriate in the location where you want to put it? Okay, Kathy Zarsky's green roof is not lipstick on a pig, just so it doesn't get back to her that I said so. All right, here's another. Maureen mentioned City Hall. Did you know that groundwater is reused there and waters the plants? It's a LEED Gold, is that what City Hall is? So any ideas, in the interest of time, I'll just throw up your hands if you have an idea. What could be a problem with that? Or opportunity? Yes.
Well, if we're in drought, the groundwater level in aquifer is low anyway, even though are they researching, how does the groundwater get into City Hall?
Through the garage.
From the river.
Yeah, it's the river, and the garage is part of it. And it does fluctuate some. The other thing to understand is we've got leaking infrastructure, unbelievable leaking infrastructure in the city of Austin. 10 to 12% of everything the water utility pumps is lost somewhere. So the urban core has this surge or perched groundwater table, sometimes influenced by the Colorado River, sometimes influenced by just leaking infrastructure. So any ideas? See, this is a trick question because we just covered Block 21, and the issue of Block 21 was perk in the water. So, and this is right next door to it. So we started a sampling program to say, well, is that stuff from Block 21 somehow getting to City Hall? And it already had been done. So I don't know whether the designers asked themselves the question, hey, is it okay to, are we thinking, is there any contaminated groundwater? Because our guys know there is a plume downtown of this perk.
I was in that city.
No? Okay. All right, well, there's an answer. So, but now we've learning something, and we learned from something happening now is Block 21. We went back to see if it was an issue. And what nice thing is that big building and basement next door creates somewhat of a catchment for the groundwater. So the groundwater movement is not going to be through that building. It's going to be more dominated by what's coming from the Colorado River. So good news, but you have to ask the question. Some tools, obvious things. If you're the humble designer, you ask questions of your mates. You know, LEED, sustainable sites. Even go to the library. That's how we figured out the whole 6th Street oil spill was at the University of Texas Library. Got to be a good web searcher and read the news, because I think the other aspect of doing projects, do you understand the political atmosphere going on right now, or not, or whatever? If you're on water treatment plant 4, it's kind of fun. It's always different. Site-specific stuff, we require environmental site assessments. Site walk, I'm amazed how many designers never go to the site. They think I've got enough information in my pocket, I can just design it, and they have no idea what may have been missed. I mentioned earlier the development GIS. Sanborn maps, have any of you ever used Sanborn maps in your projects? That's kind of cool stuff. Find out what was that old thing or what used to be there. Those, if you don't know, Sanborn was the insurance company that they mapped out all of Austin from 1890s to the, I don't know when they stopped. But you can find out by decade what was going on near your project. Oftentimes in your environmental site assessment, they'll look at those. But in case they don't, or you're doing it yourself, the web's a great resource as well for site-specific stuff. And as I said, go to the historical archives at the city clerk's office. So when you have to know everything, you have to consider everything, you have to know everything, that is a problem because you won't. So, and again, this is one of those cool, if you have Office 2010, those are actually moving gears in Office 2010. But to be the human elements of a good designer, I believe you got to be teachable, ask questions. I'm still learning. You have to drive. If you don't care or you're kind of lazy, you're going to make mistakes. And you have to have a level of humility. And that, if you don't have those combination of things, I mean, I know to be a good designer, you have to believe in yourself. And I'm not saying you need to kick yourself and say, woe is me, I'm a worm. But you have to have a level, say, you know what, I don't know everything. I'm willing to learn. I'll ask my colleagues. I'll read. I'll learn more about this topic. Be aware of your own biases. I need to read this book. Mistakes were made, but not by me. Sounds like a good one. All right, water treatment plant 4. It is an amazing beast, 6 years into it. A little bit of history. 4 points. The project initially was going over here. When I first came to the city of Austin in May of 2005, first assignment I got from my boss was, we got this water treatment plant. It's in a sensitive environmental area. Please do something. That was the direction. Okay. So these are some of the sensitivities when the treatment plant was on what was referred to as the Bull Creek site. And one of those things, oftentimes we sort of want to engineer our way out of things. Oh, you screwed it up. Well, let me just apply this new thing and it'll all be better. Well, no, you lose it, you waste it, it's done, you're not getting it back. And we've had loss of habitat and salamander up and down Bull Creek from poor construction practices. So that's the old site. The yellow dots are all salamander sites. So kind of all around it. This is illustrating the fact that as construction and as time goes on and there's development going on, you lose salamanders. Sediment deposition is linear with regard to loss of species. The warbler, it's all fun if you go out and catch some warblers sometime. It's actually with the water utility staff, of course. That's pretty fun. Fascinating thing we learned through Water Treatment Plant 4, it's like, well, what's going to disturb these golden cheek warblers and black-capped vireos? What's going to disturb them? Well, we found out, because like, is it noise? Is it light? Is it dust? What's really going to set them off? Well, I spoke with the researcher who's been researching these birds at Fort Hood, and man, the guy said he's out there and the vireos and the warblers are playing around at the same time they're playing war games out there, driving tanks and stuff all over the place. And so these are old growth, but the black-capped vireo is more about new growth. So disturbing the land is something that the military is doing and actually improves habitat, which is interesting and unexpected. But we asked the question. So I got together with this group of guys, and it was guys, sorry, in 2005. I'll go back to my spot here. And trying to fulfill the charge that I got. How are you going to fix this? And my green building experience said, well, part of what building commissioning is, as I said earlier, understanding the client's wish and oversee every decision that's made during design, during construction, and startup. Well, I thought, well, can't we apply that? And if we just say, well, let's just follow LEED. Well, LEED's not going to save vireos and salamanders. It's got to be something more robust than that. So that's why we came up with this term, environmental commissioning, borrowing from building commissioning. But the sense is, ask yourself what could happen outside the building that could negatively affect habitats and species. And once you ask that question, what possibly could go wrong, it's an infinite well to draw from, to be honest with you. And you'd be surprised the wacky things that we said. History there, if you're not reading about it in the Chronicle. Then we had a couple of endangered species, then we find another one on the Bull Creek site. It is small, again, not a very huggable creature, but endangered nonetheless. And then in 2007, council, and I will suggest that in any project, what you have, especially large projects, when you've got people who really know environmental stuff and people who know their technical expertise as far as building trades, when you say, you know, when we first interacted with the water utility, they said, well, yeah, sure, we'll build it so there's no impact. No problem. We'll do that. We're serious about doing this. And we're like, okay. And we would say, well, we know environmental stuff and species, but we don't really know what this means to build this treatment plant thing. So there's like not much overlap. And then as we start learning, oh my gosh, you're going to put a hole that big in the ground? It's just the shafts coming up are 40 to 50 foot diameter for the pipe coming up out of the ground. Well, we thought it was something smaller than that. Well, you start thinking about doing that throughout all of this Bull Creek site, you're going to decimate that site. And so as we worked together with the designers, they realized, wow, I mean, the bar's too high. I don't think we can really do it. I mean, we're looking at possibility like rock flour, if you're familiar with that, when you grind up through rocks and it becomes all that dust and it's just like white flour. To minimize that getting into features, we are looking at vacuuming methods for this whole construction project at Bull Creek. Well, in the end, I think we put a dollar amount to say, well, if you really don't want to you want to do the best you can to not mess this up, it's going to cost over $30 million additional to what you're already spending. And even then, there's no guarantees. So I believe that commissioning and really being there, the whole idea is be there while design decisions are being made, then you can affect the decisions that are made. What historically happens and what we didn't want to have happen was in that same pyramid thing, they followed the design guidelines, they met the client's expectations and code, and they toss it to us and say, you like it or not? And we would say, no, we don't like it. And they'd say, well, too late, we're going to run out of water. And you'd have to live with whatever it was. So working together, that got, I believe, and some other political deals, got that off Bull Creek. There's the new site, less environmentally sensitive, still has cave-dwelling bugs potentially underneath it. There's a close-up of it. More about seeps and springs than it is about salamanders at this site. There's an aerial. They are going nuts on this thing. Kathy Tobo? No, sorry. So what we are doing is the whole environmental commissioning. I think what we learned in this, as we're going to wind down to some questions and answers, but what we learned in this is I believe that environmental commissioning is something you can do on a lot of different projects, and I'm not selling the service or anything like that, but it's something that can be done on a lot of different projects, and it's a continuum. You say, how endangered is the resource that I'm adjacent to, and what level am I willing to do to make sure it's not compromised? And then you develop your strategy from that. So when we moved to the new plant site, we knew, well, it's not as sensitive, so we sort of ratcheted down some of the goals of the environmental commissioning. This is straight out of the city manager's office, Toby Futrell. We want the best built, most environmentally sound, on time and on budget, okay? Well, that's what happens when, right, you work in a city, a bureaucracy. Wait a minute. Well, that's our marching orders, and I don't have the authority to say, well, I think the environment's more important than a water treatment plant. So we went through, and now the commissioning not only has all these different environmental goals, but we have monitoring that will go on, and it's already started, and we all have all this checks and balances throughout the whole project. Have different team members. It's interesting how long this project has been. Our department's changed names since this project began. So some of these things are, I mean, you can think about them and ask yourself, does that make sense? But we're working the goals, we're designing these things, we're monitoring, and we're adapting. It makes sense, right? And but that's what we're doing constantly. And if I tallied up just in the last 6 months how many plan sheets I've reviewed, it was more than 1,000 plan sheets regarding this project alone. So the one thing that's so hard in this is, from an environmental commissioning purely perspective, is designers don't want somebody looking over their shoulder. They're okay with getting a permit and enduring that. But when they make design decisions, they want to say, hey, they want somebody saying, hey, stop, wait a minute, I think you ought to think about doing that a different way. So to minimize that, we asked the design team members, ask yourselves the question. Don't wait for us. You're smart people. But what we found was, again, that overlap, they don't know what question to ask. And so that's sort of the human dynamic of this is, you know, hey, don't do it that way. Don't you realize what you could possibly do? Well, they don't really like that, believe it or not. Do we have to have it? Is there another way? That's kind of what we asked people to ask themselves. So be collaborative. We didn't want to just constantly poke our finger in the eye of the designer saying, dum-dums, didn't you get? There's an environment out there to save. So there's Bull Creek, and this is sort of the fun part of this project was just ask the question. So bird-friendly buildings. What happens when you paint these big tanks? And they've got all these VOCs in the big tanks. Usually you don't ask the question. We knew enough. We'll get to that in a minute, but when we first started looking at this, we realized they're going to have the biggest storage of chlorine gas in the whole city at this treatment plant, which if you're, and that's part of our responsibility is to know a little bit what's going on. Treatment plants around the country are eliminating gaseous chlorine because it's a terrorist threat. If you poke a hole, they said the quickest way other than a nuclear device to kill a lot of people is poke a hole in a railroad tank car having chlorine gas in it near a highly populated area. So we thought, maybe forget the salamanders and forget the vireos. Maybe we ought not to be doing that. And there's a way. What they're going to do is actually make the chlorine on site. So what they're going to, and it's not a criticism of the water utility, because if you saw their operations and how careful they are about bringing the chlorine in, and they've got this door that goes down and it's all sealed, and if anything happens, it's all contained in there. That's great. But guess what? You got to drive it in from Houston, and you got, who knows what's going to happen on Austin roadways when you've got a toxic thing you're dragging around. So now they are going to just make the chlorine on site using salt and water and electricity. So that's all they got to do is zap the salt, and it combines, and you get the free chlorine coming off the sodium chloride. Simple. A bunch of things we did to minimize effects. We find out from our experience at the pool that chlorine is a problem for all kinds of things. And, you know, there's some aviary places where the guy comes in and cleans the floor with Clorox and all the birds are dead. So knowing those sort of things is important. We actually had a plant rescue on site before construction began, so you could pick up your own native plants out there. We're actually using the shredded trees out there to minimize runoff, and we got, I'll show you some pictures of that. There's some avoid David Johns, if you know David, from Watershed Protection, geologist. That's kind of what we're trying to protect, is these little voids, and in these little voids you can have these bugs and everything else, so paying attention to that is important. There you can see, instead of just saying this tree's a nuisance or whatever and we got to get rid of it to make room for this, we shredded them on site. This is them harvesting plants, but shredded them on site, so when it rains, it has to rain a lot for us to have runoff. The idea is we're just using what we've got, the material we already got, to minimize construction impacts. So yay, we moved it over here, but oops, the pipeline's going underneath the preserve. So that was the other thing we're just finishing up. Tunnel underneath Bull Creek. Anybody want to gander what the nightmare scenario is there? So we take that very seriously. Jollyville Transmission Main is JTM. These are all the things we've incorporated in this project that will minimize the chances of a negative thing happening. So everything from, EC meaning environmental commissioning, we sit down with every time a new contractor comes out, you have to have a meeting. Here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, so no surprises from the construction people. These shafts, because they might be intercepting groundwater flow, we actually put these shafts in so water can actually intercept this shaft and flow around it and continue on its way. This is a design that's incorporated into it. I mentioned the mulch. Blasting and mucking, we found out that there's blast residue that can be a real water quality issue. And so blasting areas cannot get wet because they will be covered because it washes right into the aquifer and can have a negative effect. And every day you've got to remove the blast material every day before you go home, and that's one of our commissioning elements. This shows you that permeable ring that if you encounter a void over here, it actually wraps all the way around and comes over here and goes on its way. A lot of effort, but we think it's worth it. And that, I think, is it. And time for questions.
We've got about 10 more minutes. We could have, I think, about a 5-minute question if we have any questions.
I have a quick question. Is it city staff doing the environmental commissioning, or they have a commissioning agent?
The lead commissioning agent is a city staff member, and it's all in watershed protection. So we wanted to have separation so someone wouldn't say, well, it's the fox watching the hen house sort of thing. Yes, we're all city employees, but it's watershed protection, and we do have some consultants that assist us if we have difficult questions that someone needs to spend time to answer, and we let them go at it. Good question.
I think we had a pretty good interactive questioning during the presentation. I'd like everybody to thank Tom for coming out today and especially taking us through the 500-pound gorilla project that we're all as Austinites living with and dealing with, and et cetera. Anyway, please thank Tom for being here.